The food service, hospitality, and retail industries are evolving in ways you've never heard of until now. Hosted by global industry technovator Rob Grimes and powered by the IFBTA, TechBytes is your go-to podcast, putting technology innovation and trends on the menu.
Well, welcome to another TechBytes podcast, but this is sort of an unusual one. Because you would think that I get to talk to my friends all the time, but that isn't true. And so I've got Ted Horner in Australia and John Burns in Phoenix. And welcome to TechBytes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this may be the longest conversation we've had in a while that's not over. Well, he's got his beer there, so I don't know what that was you were drinking there. But we saw each other a few weeks ago at HITEC, but it just seems like we see each other at different analyst days and things like that as well. And I just thought, maybe we just sort of start out with HITEC and just sort of talk about, what was your just overall impression? Not necessarily anything specific, but did you come out with, like afterwards, if somebody said, how was it, you would say?
I would say it was busy. It was well attended, and it was a great networking opportunity, as it always is. Pardon me, a big struggle in this business, especially as we're all working remotely now, is to just keep in touch with people and exchange ideas to find out what's going on. So HITEC is a trade show. HITEC is an educational environment, but it's also a wonderful gathering opportunity. And it was that again this year. And you could stand in the exhibit hall or in front of the registration desk, and the whole world of hospitality, technology.
Should I ask you how many HITECs you've been to?
More than I've got fingers for. So, but
there you go.
It's a good reunion, and it's an important reunion.
But I do agree because, once or twice, I probably see you once or twice a year. Ted, I might see once a year or once every other year. So it is a good opportunity to get together in person and really sort of chat about things. Ted, what did you think?
I tend to agree with John. That to be more precise, that was my 36th HITEC. I've only missed two HITECs owing to COVID.
You probably don't count very well there in Australia. There have been over 52 HITECs, so if you've been at 36, you've missed more than two.
Yes. Okay, since I've only missed two since 1989. All right, let's rephrase it. But yes, look, the reason I go is the opportunity to network. I mean, it's difficult to have in-depth presentations on the floor. I go there a lot to, meet with fellow consultants, get an update from people. I agree. Indianapolis, well, it was different. I'd never been there before. I'd hardly consider it an international destination. But, believe it or not, some of the functions, and that's where the networking is done, were very well done. I had an opportunity to, attend a consultants briefing session on the last day, as John did, which was very good. We got a lot of information about, the new vehicle that, is now, which was Sabre Hospitality Solution, which is now coming out of with TPG in a new entity. So yes, I suppose the only thing I would say is that at HITEC I did see some interesting new ideas, but I probably still get the sense that the number one talking point is artificial intelligence. If you don't have a position on artificial intelligence,
you had to go there, right?
I know there's nothing wrong if you don't have a position.
You can't go to any single conference or meeting with somebody wanting to talk about AI. And I've been trying to change that narrative to say, why don't we just talk about, the outcome, the actionable items that are going to come from it or actionable information. I should just make the assumption that the AI is there.
Yep.
That it's already in there. And I will tell you, as an observation, every show I go to now or every conference, I read the signage above the aisle. And even though AI was a big subject, I didn't see AI on every aisle above it or in every booth. And I have seen that in the past.
Yep. I think you're right. Actually, so, in terms of I think there's not enough emphasis yet on the process side. How do companies prepare themselves to take advantage of the technology benefits that AI brings to the table? And I think that's where we need to move to, rather than, yes, we're doing something and it's going to do this. I'm now looking at testimonials and return on investment opportunities, and how hotels have, work their processes internally to take advantage of the technology that AI brings.
Well, yeah, John.
I find myself looking and marveling at how quickly AI is evolving. So I feel for the people on the show floor who are working. They've been working for 6 or 9 months trying to bring AI into this application. Meanwhile, AI has changed, new versions that come along every week. So they're forever playing catch up. The cutting edge is incredibly impressive, but integrating it into day to day, especially behind the scenes, is a real chore.
Well, as an observation on that, because I've been talking to a lot of people just in general, and one of the unfortunate or fortunate things of having been around for a while in the industry is I started to realize it's really actually nothing new. I mean, you guys would remember the term expert systems, right?
Yep.
And, when you want to clone your expert, basically, and teach it the knowledge of the expert so it could make decisions and help us. Well, in this case, the expert is the collective expert of all of the minds out there and all the data that's now available, because unlike in those days, it's now connected together. But in reality, it isn't really something new, and we still have to train it.
Yep.
And I guess maybe the acceptance part of it, or the reason why, Ted, to your point, that people may not know how to use it as well, is because not everybody's using it in their regular life. How many people are actually using the AI tool that's in the bar on their browser, or on their phone?
I think we're still a little intimidated and a little mystified. At the same time, we're a little amazed. I look at translations that AI does. I look at summaries of documents. I look at copy that I ask it to put together. And sometimes it's stunning. Sometimes it's better written than I can do. There's something there.
It's what, better written than you would do?
No question.
Yeah, but you can always put it in your voice, right? Because I've had my hand slapped a couple times. Somebody said, "Hey, did you?" I said, "So I learned, right?" So I said, "Go read the articles I've written or the speeches I've made, and then come back and put it in my voice."
Neat approach.
Yeah, I think.
Do you think, Ted, that is there an adoption difference in different parts of the world?
No, I don't think so. I think John's point's a valid one. In fact, I'm almost now, when I'm writing up my executive summaries or recommendations, I'm looking at what does AI think about my ideas. There's still the element of the personalisation. Your personal opinions can't always be totally reflected in using an AI approach to something, but it's always worthwhile to look at, when they're scanning everything else, to say, have I forgotten something? And in John's case, it's right. I mean, things are getting interesting when you have Facebook and LinkedIn, and down the bottom they say, do you want, right? Do you want to, have AI rewrite it for you better, right? I had to give
Well, that is something that's sort of embedded in it, that it wants to be a helper, right?
yes.
So I sort of get that. I was talking to a consultant in the food service industry, not a tech consultant, but actually it was probably good it wasn't a tech consultant. So I was talking to an operational consultant, and he was saying to me, "Rob, explain this thing to me." And I said, "Well, why don't we went out, we had coffee, Starbucks, of course. So we went out, and we're sitting there. I said, let me just ask you a question. Why they hire you? What do you do?" And he told me. I said, "Well, when you write your report, what is it that they think that they're going to get special from you?" And he gives me what they do. And I said, "Well, to write that report, what do you collect? What do you ask them for? What's your list?" Right? So we sat there at a coffee shop because he had his computer. I said, "Do me a favor. Send me a couple of reports you've written recently, and then send me the data the customer gave you." And we did that. And I said, "Okay, let's just put this in and have it write a report based on the data and do an analysis and see how close it is to where you came out." Personalization, of course, Ted. And you know what? It wasn't that far off. And I sort of realized that maybe people just don't think that they can use these things. their natural inclination isn't to do that.
Well, I think at the end of the day, when you start looking at that, Rob, you start thinking, what's the future of consultants? Is our knowledge base being diminished because we are using that tool? But I just think it's a useful exercise. I mean, I'll give you a good example. I was recently writing a report on the benefits or disadvantages of a best of breed single vendor versus multiple vendors using APIs. And I asked the question.
Big subject.
I know, but it came up with some really interesting points that I had not even thought about. And you think that's when I start to think, gee, is my role as a consultant going to be diminished because I'm using a tool set that's expanding my knowledge base, to use that. But it was quite interesting what they came up with, right? And I was able, just as you do, to compare what they had to say versus what my opinions had been formed based on.
Yeah, but there's a difference because, they always talk about robots and AI, at least for the time being, because never's a long time,
yes.
Of taking the empathy and the passion out of our industry in hospitality. And the difference is that the questions to ask, you're able to tell the personality of the people you're dealing with in the customer base. And the computer's not going to do that. It really can work from statistics today.
Yep.
It's not looking at the facial expression when somebody, and it's coming, right? So you actually have that personalization in there that you can take the data and then, put it out in a way that is meaningful to them that maybe is a nuance that a computer's not going to do.
Yep. John, what do you think?
I'd like to approach it from a different angle, if I may. What I encounter time and again is people saying that artificial intelligence is going to help us with personalization in dealing with hotel guests. And it's going to be able to look at the database and come back with recommendations. And as you drill down, we're still talking pretty primitive stuff. It's going to say, here is the rate to recommend, or this person had a corner room the last time, offer them a corner room and see if you can upsell them. I think there is an opportunity for going through the huge database of information we have about any one of us and being able to come up with more personalized offers. But in a lot of cases, our databases aren't sufficiently granular right now. I understand that it may be able to look at my hotel bill and say that I bought a bottle of wine, but it won't know whether it was a Pinot Noir or a Chardonnay. It won't know the brand that I favor. It's when we get into folio detail or receipt detail or even lower stuff we don't record at this point. Do you like your coffee with sugar or sweetener? When we get to that level, then we can do some fascinating personalization things. But I think we're a little premature in saying that this is going to be our salvation in terms of improving the relationship with our guests, because there just isn't the level of detail that it can draw on yet.
So I have to ask you a question about this. So I talked to somebody recently from Marriott, and they told me that Marriott has come to the realization that they're the largest restaurant company in the world. So I had to think about that for a moment. And what is it, 8,000, 9,000 hotels? And if you have an average of 5 or 6 food and beverage outlets, including room service, I guess that could be right. Yet the systems that are there. So what you described, John, is if we were in a restaurant and you were, or you were in a Starbucks, you would know exactly how you want the latte and how many pumps of this and what's there. And I guarantee it's on my app when I order, right?
Yep.
But for some reason in hotels, I bet they got a lot of data on the stuff that goes on in the hotel and how you're booking and your room type. And do you want to be near the elevator? And they know all those kinds of things. But when it comes to food and beverage, for some reason, the systems seem to be antiquated.
I think that's absolutely correct. When you describe it, my first inclination is to think we're in the hotel business. And running a restaurant is a necessary evil for some hoteliers. It was a lot. A loser, you just had to do it if you're going to operate the hotel. And, if I was being blunt, I'd say we didn't take it seriously enough. Or come the 21st century when details matter, we weren't looking at those consumption details the way Starbucks does. So, yeah, good observation.
Yeah, but there is the opportunity to do a lot with premium liquors. There's opportunity with the sports bars and the television systems, the entertainment that's going on.
Yep.
And Ted, whenever I go out to the Asia Pacific area, you see these group companies that are in hotels and restaurants. And the operators seem to really know how to, how to do both. And now you see, by the way, these hotel brands getting into retail,
Yep.
but selling towels and beds and all the stuff that they're doing, right?
Absolutely. I think the interesting point is that that information is available, but the point is that for some reason, on a transactional basis on a point of sale system, but for some reason that information is not necessarily being passed across. But like for example, I like gin and tonics, right? I like a certain type of Pinot Noir, and to be honest, it would be nice if that information was gathered, and then part of my offering would be, Ted, as a welcome drink, please go to Bar X and have your Hendrix and Fever tonic water. I mean, I would be impressed enough that someone even made the offer in the first place, and would certainly take up the offer, and would probably finish up in that bar drinking 3 or 4 instead of 1. So I think there's a lot of scope.
Well, now I'm knowing what you're drinking, so that it's going to be on me, right, to go ahead and buy you that drink, right?
But if you have that level of granularity, if you have that level of detail, you can impress, you can personalize. But we've got to find the.
But you know what? Yeah, that word. So there are 2 key words, and I want to just take a break for a minute and then just sort of shift off of because we've left AI anyway.
Yep.
But I would like to talk about what seems to be a trend out there. There are 2 words I keep hearing: frictionless and personalization. And they seem to be the words of 2025. So let's just take a quick break. We'll come back. I'm with John Burns and Ted Horner, and we're just having a conversation about technology, starting in the hospitality space. But I know these guys also know a little bit more than just that, and we'll share their observation. We'll be back in just a minute.
With the rapid expansion of technology in the food and beverage industries, finding the right supplier can become overwhelming and complicated. To simplify this process, the IFBTA created Exchange. Exchange is a powerful search tool where users can easily narrow down their technology search and refine results by application type, geography served, department, and more. Browse resources and learn more about the industry's technology suppliers at exchange.ifbta.org. Now, back to the show.
So welcome back, and I'm with Ted Horner and John Burns, and we're just having a conversation between friends. We were comparing notes on some things in the hotel industry, but I'd sort of like to shift it a little bit. There were some other takeaways that did surprise me, by the way, at a HITEC. It doesn't have to do with HITEC, but there were some in there. There was a startup area. It seemed like a startup hall, and there was robotics in there. And it wasn't the normal robotics, which I see, which is something, taking something out to a table. And I know people are playing around with it for housekeeping and things. It was more intelligent robotics. And we see these hotels in Japan where they're having robots at the front desk, and they're having AI at the front desk to greet you. And Disney used to do that a long time ago. And I'm just sort of curious where you see some of the other trends or some of the other technologies out there, such as robotics, being out there, or, generative AI voice recognition in call centers, because there's so much that's done that way.
Well, one of the things I know that's taking off here in Australia, we are a high labour cost country. So we're now starting to see the emergence of robots in terms of vacuum cleaners, doing corridors, rooms, public space areas, because nobody wants to do those tasks. And it's interesting you mentioned Japan earlier, because the reality is, that you mentioned that hotel called Hanjurin years ago that had, but apparently that I'm told that it's gone now because they didn't get the level of acceptance. And it goes to your point earlier.
They didn't. It may have been before its time.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But I think the issue is, and it's this same old story we're talking about, high tech versus high touch. If we're moving to a frictionless environment, and a lot of that was brought forward by COVID, how do we reconcile the emergence of this new technology, which is frictionless, but at the same time still keep an element of personalisation or face-to-face interaction. After all, we are still in the hospitality business, and I'm seeing various variations of how that's being done geographically around the world. It's always fascinated me years ago, and you've been to Asia Pacific many times yourself, that people back in the good old days at Mandarins and the Shangri-Las could remember all this information about dead order. And it was because they were highly observant and they had some sort of process of passing that information across the staff, so that when I'm...
But you don't think it was because the labor was cheap and you could throw a lot of labor at something that other places couldn't throw as much labor?
I think there's an element in that, Rob, that yes, that they could hire a lot more people per guest as opposed to other countries with higher labour rates. Yes, I do think there's a point, but they at least had a system, and it added an element of extra luxury, because people would remember your name if you were going. They saw you lift, and they would say to you, "How are you today, Mr. Horner?" Whatever else it was. And we're talking 15, 20 years ago, right? So
what happens when we replace you? Wait. What happens when we replace you with, and the customer doesn't know that it's really not Ted that they're talking to? We hear the stories all the time there, and it is able to personalize. It has the voice. It has, what happens, because that's coming. It starts with the criminals who are doing the fake stuff, but it's coming, and people don't know.
I look. The other thing as well is that we're seeing the emergence of chatbots and stuff, asking lots of questions, and I sometimes get their very stereotyped answers, and they're not always addressing the specific question per se. But everybody now is pushing that line, and where do you go to get the next level of detail? Because it may not necessarily come from a chatbot type orientated scenario.
Well, the chatbots just annoy me a lot.
Yes,
but when I actually can, hey, I actually have to ask this question: that is it worse to have a chatbot who sort of figures out what you're doing but probably doesn't have all the answers, or is it worse to speak to somebody in a call center in some place where it's unfortunately hard to understand and things like that? I think there's going to be a combination of the both, where you have those call centers, but maybe there's even a voice simulation, like you might see on Mission Impossible or something, where the person's speaking in one thing but is coming out differently. That would be interesting, actually. We should try that. We should change up the voices on this.
I look at it and find myself frustrated time and again with the chatbots. As Ted said, they're too simple at this point. They're not understanding the question. And in most cases, we as human beings ask poor questions. No wonder the machine can't understand us. But we expect, if it's a human, they can sort out the question. Machines can't. Okay, let me zoom off in a different direction. I think we face a real problem in terms of staff, and we have to find how to do some things better. And a lot of those things aren't front of the house, they're back of the house. And what has been fascinating me are the couple of vendors who are focusing on RPA, robotic process automation. So where we used to go through the night audit forms, where we used to do credit card reconciliation or review the long distance bill, or so many things that were just mind-numbing, but we did them year after year after year. I think we're making progress now in automating a lot of those dumb things that were just killing our staff. So now we can't get the staff to do it, and we're finding better ways to do it with automation. I like that.
Well, you know what? I might agree with
bots.
Well, I might agree with you on that, but how many times, even recently in a trip I took last week, did I come down to the front desk to want to check out at 5 a.m? They told me they can't do it because they're still running the end of day. We still haven't gotten over the idea of a 24-hour day that these things keep going. I think, that they just keep going like that. I don't quite get that one, actually.
Well, now it has to be said that the latest generation of PMSs don't need to have that end-of-day process. It's a flip of a switch. But we have a pattern, a trend, a legacy in the hotel business of keeping the PMS till it's absolutely dead. So the PMS in that hotel was installed 35 years ago. It's not quite
That
cutting
makes no sense. Wait, that makes no sense. The PMS is a piece of software. It's not like a point of sale system, which is a piece of hardware or a fryer or something that, you got to replace. So I don't quite actually understand what you just said, because it's so much easier to replace a piece of software.
Well, yes, but we've got a whole generation of these old systems that were bought, purchased. The license is there. People are not doing software as a service. These are old purchase arrangements, and they're going to keep the system and the software that's in it as long as they possibly can.
Maybe it's because of the integration and the number of interfaces they have to deal with.
Or we're just not accustomed to the idea of refreshing our technology on a regular basis.
Let me ask you guys this, because when you've been around a while, and it's funny because I've been saying recently to a lot of people, I keep having these deja vu moments that things that people think are brand new, I saw many years ago, and maybe they were before their time, like we said before. Is there something that you both have seen in the past that you just thought was a great technology? It was before its time, but you still believe it's going to happen?
That's an interesting question. I flash back through all the startups I've encountered over the years that have failed. And some of them, they were due to wireless processing and all kinds of things, were just too early. It was a great idea, but it with the available technology and the available mindset of the customer, it just didn't work.
The one that frustrates me the most.
I mean, I see them.
The one that frustrates me.
What's that?
And the same, I'm sure it appears to you. Why is it that when Ted Horner flies overseas and arrives at a hotel at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning, that I have to buy a room the night before? Why can't I buy and go into a room at 6 o'clock in the morning and check out inside the 24 hours? Now, I don't know why hotels at airports have it, but for some reason, it's something that's frustrated me for years and years. That I have to buy.
Truck stops have it too. Truck stops have it as well.
Yeah. And for some reason,
that may be for a different reason.
Yeah. Yes. But for some reason, vendors don't want
to. But wait a minute.
What? Yep.
So, you know what? That is such a great comment. Now, we could theorize as to why that is.
Yep.
I will tell you, though, that if I follow trends, like one of my tech peeves would be the fact that I don't get free internet on the airline. Yep. Okay. And so now, and remember when in the room, you used to have to pay a fortune for internet. Then they gave it to the higher level. Now everybody gets free internet, right?
Yep.
So I've started to see some major hotel chains have a class of people who are their premier people out there that do have a 24-hour clock that can check in, and the clock starts at that point. So that tells me that if they do that maybe in 5 or 6 years, that'll be offered to everybody. But maybe it's a labor issue, John. Maybe it's we got to be able to service rooms and things 24 hours, and we may not have the labor to do it. And maybe that's where the opportunity is.
I think part of it's a labor issue. Sorry. But I think part of it is just our conventional mindset. A decade ago, Sheraton was promoting this idea that you get 24 hours. And it was fairly widespread for a few months or a few seasons and then died away. And I don't know whether it died because of lack of interest or administrative hurdles that needed to be overcome.
Well, they may not have had the technology to handle it either.
I actually think it's just, this is the way we do it, and we're not going to change. We are locked into a traditional pattern, and
so
bothered.
No, but you know what? I get the idea that, that you're saying that people are locked into it and they don't want to do change. And maybe when I look at change comes from other parts of the world.
Yep.
Change comes from the next generation that is just so used to using a handheld, a phone, that they don't even need their computer to type their stuff. Change comes from other industries that do it to us. So in the restaurant industry, I see it coming from retail. I see it coming from hotels, because once they have kiosks and airlines, they expect it somewhere there. So maybe the change comes because somebody else does it or the customer demands it.
Innovation is not in our DNA as hotel operators. I look at what I think was the greatest example of innovation, and that's the heavenly bed. So here was Weston, and my mind's suddenly gone blank. The fellow who has brought back Starwood. Who am I trying to think of?
Steve, not Steve Case. It was. Oh gosh, I know exactly who you're talking about with Starwood, and he's back. By the way, it's he's come back recently.
This does not speak well for my memory. He was an outsider. He was a frequent traveler, but he was not a hotelier. And when he became involved because of private equity in Starwood and Sheraton, Weston, he said, "What matters?"
Barry Sternlicht.
Barry Sternlicht, yes. So
the hard drive takes a little bit of time, to come around to the name, right?
World found it. So Sternlicht said, what matters is the mattress. What matters is the sleep. What matters is a good night. And we, till then, had said, we're going to buy the cheapest, hardest, most durable mattress we can find. And we celebrated a $200 mattress. Along comes this outsider who says, we need a $2,000 mattress, and we are going to do it. And he upset the entire apple cart, and we all win as a result. Then he did the heavenly shower, and we went from a trickle out of this poor little thing mounted on the wall to the whole generation of showers we have now. But an outsider did it. More recently, Citizen M. And all of Citizen M is outsiders. They've been very radical. And they're talking about subscriptions, where you can have a subscription membership to the hotel, and it gives you, for a few $100s a month, privileged access to availability, a free drink when you check in. Outsiders.
But by the way, it is creative thinking that comes from the outside, and a lot of times an entrepreneur comes up with it. I find it very interesting what hotels seem to be getting into today.
Mm-hmm.
I see cruise ships, I see airplanes, and I also see tiny houses, which, is just amazing to me that somebody's just, might as well just have a tent because everything's blurring there. And, Ted, when we talk about why are people slow to adopt change in our industry, why can't we get that bed? Why can't we have 24-hour? Do you have a theory behind that?
I do. And I think one of the biggest issues, I believe, is that the vendors in our space do not articulate, in my humble opinion, a direct ROI. I deal with owners. Owners are more cynical about technology. And when you've got a budget for a hotel, right? When you've got a budget for a hotel, IT has to compete with everything else. So I think the problem is vendors don't interact much with owners or decision makers.
I always follow what's going on in the consumer side of electronics.
Yep.
And, there are things that just sort of get me excited because I think that they're going to make a big difference on the hospitality side. For me personally, it's the trifold phone, which Samsung will finally come out with, and Huawei came out with a year ago. I think that with that kind of tablet, a person can, take orders. They can do all kinds of things, multifunctional type of thing. Is there something that you guys see in the consumer area that you just think is going to, when it finds its way into hospitality, is just going to take us by storm?
I look at state-of-the-art digital presentation and don't find it in hotels, but in gaming, for instance. What is possible in terms of remarkable presentation on screen. And then I look at what we're doing to portray our product, and it can be food, but certainly in terms of lodging. We are so lackluster. I worry I'm fascinated with the thought that we may be able to grab cutting edge e-commerce technique and use it and apply it in the presentation of our accommodation. And now our accommodation surrounded by experience. But I just am not convinced we have the motivation to do it. And I worry.
Do you think that the gaming industry does lead the way in a lot of the technologies? Because in the past, they seem to be pretty old technologies, but they do seem, when it comes to digital, they seem to have a lot when it comes to customer preference.
Yep.
Ted, you got, a lot of gaming going out there in Asia, and there's,
True. I can't really. Unfortunately, I'm not a gamer, so I really can't make much commentary in that respect. But I think to some extent, I tend to agree with. I think we've also got a lot to do with virtual. I still think we've got a lot to do in the virtual reality space. I don't think we do a very good job, showing hotels in the best light. And the other thing as well that I see happening is more and more efforts with technology in marketing revenue outside the room to hotels. More hotels now to be more experiential. I think if you look at some of the companies that are specialising in those experiential environments, we as an industry have done a very poor job. I remember Serge Brazan a couple of years ago, CEO of Apple, saying that 40% of our business is outside the hotels. What are we doing to try and encourage the local community to embrace the services? We've invested in food and beverage, we've invested in spa and other things, but what are we doing to try and encourage those people to actually use our facilities? So I think we've got a long way to go in the marketing of those services to our potential guests.
Hey, you know what, though? I think you've made a very good point there. You know who seems to do that well? It's the cruise ship industry.
Yep.
Because, they park the cruise ship, but they've got those tours and they've got all those, if it's not to their own island,
Yep.
They've got all the tours and the day trips, and they have a lot of the relationships with the local places. Do you think that we're going to start a deja vu moment? United Airlines, Avis Car Rental, and there was a third one in there. What was it? Allegis, I think the name of the company was, with a hotel group, right? It was Westin Hotels, I think.
That's right.
And it was a partnership. Do you think we're going to end up seeing either a partnership official, where they acquire, where you see an airline, a hotel, a cruise ship, a restaurant company all coming together again in a single unit, or is it just going to be in the ecosystem partnerships?
I think it's going to be more in partnerships.
Yeah.
Although we may be outside of the conventional players. I look at Airbnb, and they have completely retooled their display and reservation platform to support experiences. They've spent tens of millions of dollars because they believe they can really benefit by offering a more substantial and more rewarding offering, rewarding to them financially, rewarding to the traveler. So I think we've got people around the edges, OTAs as well, who are looking at how you have these new combinations and really effectively present them and sell them. They're going to disrupt.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think it's more about to be building partnerships which are mutually beneficial across the whole the spectrum, rather than a single entity trying to buy into other things and do things. I think that probably, but I do think there's a lot of space and opportunity for partnerships to develop to provide curated experiences beyond the room, and I think we've got a long way to go yet for hotels. And I'm going to be interested to see some of the big hotels. Like, if you look at Marriott, they claim their biggest asset is their 230 million or whatever they've got Bonvoy members. But then I look at the same time, and you look now with millennials and zillennials that are not that interested in loyalty. So trying to match, where is Marriott going to do as their Bonvoy members pass? What are they going to do to try and drive that level of loyalty? And I think maybe partnering with experiential companies that are in that space might be an answer to retaining or growing their membership base.
I agree with you. It's going to be about the experience that people have, no matter how they get it. But they're going to look at the hospitality companies coming together to create that experience when you travel, that you're doing that. And I think that your point about Marriott and Bonvoy, I was It's so funny you brought that up because I was complaining about something the other day and I had to look it up. And I said, I've been, at the top of the heap there for over 20 years. Well, it turns out I've been at the top status for 32 years, but I've been 35 years. And the only reason that it's not longer than that, because I realized this just the other day that they started that program in 1983. Do you want to know why I'm not longer than 35 years?
No.
They had a limit.
It's because I worked for Marriott for a number of years and you couldn't do it.
Yep.
And so my years started counting after I left Marriott, then I was able to do it.
Just as a moment of history, Mr. Grimes, in 1989, my first HITEC was at Phoenix. It's never been there since. And I remember going to a session where a Marriott employee was talking about point of sale, and that was yours truly. Yeah. So that's how far back you go when it comes to Marriott.
Well, we could certainly compare notes on that, but listen, just sort of as a parting thought, since you both are, and I should have pointed this out at the beginning, you are Hall of Fame members of the HFTP and HITEC, which means you are forever enshrined on that board with your picture that I now see every year. And so since you have all these years of wisdom, what is your prediction of where and this is a big question, but it probably needs just a little answer. Where do you believe that the greatest innovation in the hospitality industry would be if we just looked 5 years out? Because I think 2 to 3 years is too close. But what is the biggest innovation in the experience or where technology is going to have its impact in 5 or 10 years?
You first, Ted.
Oh, thank you. Well, I saw a little company at HITEC this year that won the 20X entrepreneurship company called Levy. Very interesting. And I look at what they're doing, right, and using AI, sorry, I use that term again, where they're analysing a room to see if there's anything wrong, which is eventually going to replace the need for a supervisor to check a room after it's been cleaned. And then you start thinking about that's the first iteration. Where is that going to go? And I think there are a lot of opportunities in that. If you go beyond that particular application, I see that really coming to play where we can look at things that we can speed up the process, or I think of it in terms of I'm a guest, a VIP, I'm waiting in the foyer to get my room. If I can get my room earlier because of the introduction of a new piece of technology, I really think, that's advantageous. It's a win. It's a win for everybody. So I see more of that type of technology really coming to the fore over the next 3 to 5 years.
To speed up the process and to be able to act more efficiently and then perhaps get you to your 24-hour check-in.
Hey, absolutely. Mr. Burns.
John?
Let me tie together several things we've said, and fairly briefly. We talked about Barry Sternlicht and what he has done with the heavenly bed and the heavenly shower. He tried and succeeded marvelously in another venture. I remember when he announced the name of his new hotel company, W. And I said to people, no one would ever go to a hotel named W. Well, was I wrong? Fabulously wrong. We had innovation internally, something we had overlooked, the opportunity to have spirit and personality within the hotel. Okay, he taught us that, I'm going to call him a hotelier now, we can still come with good ideas. I think if we can apply that innovative spirit, there's the opportunity to personalize. And I'm going to go and talk about the restaurant business and say, years ago, someone said to me, the most important factor in building repeat business in a restaurant is if the host or the hostess or the maitre d' says, welcome back, Mr. Burns. Just a little bit of recognition can have a huge impact. We, with our personalization technology and our focus on personalization, can soon greet people, respect them, acknowledge them, and have an ongoing relationship. I think we're going to use all that we're learning, putting together, including AI, to be more personal and more welcoming.
And there's an area where the restaurant industry can learn from the hospitality industry, who does know how to do that. So the only other thought that came to mind with your example about, who would have thought you could have succeeded with a name like W Hotels? I mean, who would have thought that TED Talks would be so popular? Beats me. Anyway,
All right.
listen, guys, it's been a pleasure having this long-range conversation with you. I certainly look forward to getting together again somewhere, maybe not Indianapolis, Ted, but we'll figure something out in between Australia, Phoenix, Washington, D.C. We'll figure something out. So, guys, thank you very much for joining me on TechBytes today, and I'm sure we will continue this conversation elsewhere.
Rob, it's been great fun. Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by the International Food and Beverage Technology Association. The IFBTA is the industry's voice of food service, hospitality, and retail technology, providing thought leadership as your single, impartial, and go-to resource. The IFBTA offers in-person and online communities to connect with your peers, the exchange, an all-encompassing global technology resource, and an industry-wide professional education and certification program. The bottom line is the IFBTA is your place to gather, learn, and share in conversations like the one we're having today. Thank you for joining us on this episode of TechBytes, powered by the IFBTA. I'm Rob Grimes, your host, and I look forward to taking our next bite of technology together.